Hi, Founder fans. Jason here, and today's founder is Richard Bayley, the doctor in charge when the New York City hospital riots broke out. So, Bayley actually went from America to Great Britain to study medicine and returned to North America in 1777, just after the Revolutionary War had broken out. And he decides to throw in with the Loyalists. He becomes a medical surgeon for the Loyalists who were supporting the British side in the war. Now, why are we talking about him on Founder of the Day? Well, he goes on to play an important role. First of all, we can't really determine why Bayley chose the Loyalists over the Patriots, though he was from New York City and much of his family lived in New York City, so you could see why he might want to stay in New York City. And his main goal was to be a New York City physician, not so much choose sides in politics, really to focus on being a physician. As I said, though, he does join the British for a bit there, but he falls ill pretty quickly and leaves after just a few months and never rejoins the fight. So Bayley ends up going and becoming a physician in New York City. Now, when the Revolutionary War ends and the British evacuate New York City, many loyalists go with them and the Patriots come in. The thing is, as opposed to many other places where loyalists were treated very, very poorly throughout North America, in New York City they weren't treated great, but the city had just been evacuated, and the people who were now going to run New York City and rebuild it, essentially, because it had literally burned at one point, about a third of it, well, they needed some help. So they couldn't necessarily kick out one of the best physicians in the city, now could they? So they don't, and they permit Richard Bayley to stay in New York City, where he does become one of the top physicians in New York. He focuses a lot on helping the poor. Additionally, he teaches anatomy at Columbia University, what they then called King's College, and he becomes an expert in amputations, cataract surgery, and curing yellow fever. He is one of the authorities on all of those subjects, not just in New York City, but in North America. And a few years later, this is when, in 1788, the hospital riots break out, sometimes called the Doctors' Riots or the New York City Hospital Riots. And well, Richard Bayley's office is the reason these riots break out. You see, it had been customary, not just in colonial America, but in around the world for a very long time, for aspiring doctors to train on cadavers. Doctors still train on cadavers. At the time, it was seen as very unchristian to do, and therefore, doctors would have people dig up freshly buried bodies for them to study. Again, real gross, but very common. Unfortunately for Bayley, one of his students was studying an arm. A gentleman named John Hicks was studying a cadaver's arm when he saw some children who played outside. And he thought it would be funny to take the arm and wave the dead arm, the not attached to a body arm, at the children. This, you might imagine, freaked the kids out, and they ran home and told their parents. Now, it's a little hazy on whether or not this next part happened, but according to the people who got angry about this, he told the children it was their dead mother's arm. That's pretty harsh. Kinda don't think it's true, but some people also may have suspected it was the recently deceased mom's arm. So where the mom's arm story comes from is hard to determine, but that story's there, and yeah, I don't know if it's for good reason, but there's definitely reasons. Either way, the people of New York City were not excited about this, and they went to Richard Bayley's office and started a riot. A pretty serious riot, to the point where Governor George Clinton was forced to call in the militia to suppress the riot at Richard Bayley's hospital. This actually has kind of a finer lining, though, because body snatching, as it was called, was still illegal, but in an effort to combat that, while permitting doctors to study medicine, they finally passed a law in New York City that would be followed in other places, where anyone used any criminal who was sentenced to capital punishment, their cadaver would then be donated to to hospitals and doctors to learn. So this is an important revelation from Richard Bayley's hospital riots. After this, despite again having been a loyalist, Richard Bayley is named as the first health officer in New York City for the Port of New York. He's the first health officer. And in this situation, he sets many precedents, including the ability to quarantine anyone arriving on ships carrying more than 40 people. it's a lot of power to give someone, but at the time, people coming in from ships from all over the world could be bringing in any disease, and there was only one way to stop that disease from getting off the boat. You leave people on the boat until you're satisfied that they're not bringing anything off. And from there, Bayley lives a fairly long life, contributing many ways to the health and safety of Americans and New Yorkers in particular. And again, despite being a loyalist, being a pretty important American founder. So I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, throw me a like down there. It's the best thing you can do, and more people will come learn about the American Revolution with us. And if you're new here, subscribe. I put out videos about the American Revolution 7 days a week. I'll be back with another founder for you tomorrow.